was the right time to stand up for freedom? Could it be when you start to feel creating children who'll inherit the pain and the debt of this nation and be slaves to the banks that cause hyperinflation, who are masters of commerce, lies, and bad legislation? Whoa, if you looked in the eyes of 1,000 young children through fences of razors, their innocence stolen as the red flag of tyranny flies in the open, is that when you finally notice? Whoa, but I'm only a stranger here. I'm a long, long way from my home, and they say I can't change all the things I find strange, but what can one man do alone?
As we record tonight, we've just learned of another act of violence that has shocked the nation. Charlie Kirk, 31, founder of Turning Point USA, was fatally shot during a speaking event at Utah Valley University. This assassination has elicited bipartisan, although not universal, condemnation and left much of the country racked with sorrow and outrage. It stings already that we must add his name to the growing list of individuals whose deaths have divided rather than united us. Our hearts go out to Kirk's family and friends, and to the family of Irina Zarutska, and to every victim of our failing society who never made the headlines or whose tragedies have been buried by more immediate events. I don't say this to dismiss the human tragedy, but like many, I'm weary from so much of it, and that weariness leads back to urgency. It feels like the rule of law in our country is fraying, and the solutions being offered from across the political spectrum, deploying power, silencing speech, are precisely what our founders warned could destroy the system they built. And that brings us to tonight's question. When, if ever, does the federal government have constitutional authority, not to mention moral authority, to override state or local authority in the name of restoring order? And how can we decide based on the founding principles of federalism? Not politics, not tribalism. Let's begin by picturing the following scene. A state governor has publicly declared his intention to defy federal law. He's mobilized his state's National Guard, claiming he's protecting public safety and maintaining order against federal overreach. The governor insists Washington has no constitutional authority to interfere with his state's institutions. Local law enforcement backs the governor's position. Crowds gather daily, some peaceful, others increasingly agitated. Tensions escalate when federal marshals arrive to enforce a court order, only to find their path blocked by armed National Guardsmen acting on direct orders from the State House. The situation spirals. Violence erupts. People are injured. Some are killed. The president, watching from Washington, faces a choice: respect the state's claimed sovereignty or deploy federal force to override local authority. He chooses force. Federal troops surround the area. The president federalizes the very National Guard units that had been blocking federal action, placing them under direct federal command. Local officials are essentially told, comply, or be arrested. Now here's the question. Is this federal overreach? An unconstitutional abuse of presidential power? Or is this necessary enforcement of the rule of law? Your answer might depend on when I tell you this happened, because I'm describing September 1957 in Little Rock, Arkansas, when Governor Orville Phobus used the Arkansas National Guard to prevent 9 black students from integrating Central High School, until President Eisenhower federalized those same Guard units and deployed the 101st Airborne Division to escort those children to class. Now, most Americans today, regardless of political affiliation, agree Eisenhower did the right thing. But here's the uncomfortable question. Are we judging that decision based on constitutional principles and a consistent framework for federal power, or because we approve of the outcome? Because those same federal powers, the same assertions of federal authority over local law enforcement, the same presidential claims to override state and local officials, they're being exercised right now. President Trump has deployed National Guard troops to Washington, D.C. and Los Angeles, with a federal judge ruling the L.A. deployment illegal. He's threatened to use the National Guard in Chicago, Baltimore, and New Orleans over local objections, and federal authorities are increasingly asserting jurisdiction in local criminal cases, like the recent federal charges filed against the man who murdered Ukrainian refugee Irina Zarutska in Charlotte. A tragic killing. It's become a flashpoint for debates about this issue, but also about mental health, repeat offenders, but mostly about who gets to decide how justice is served. So the only difference between 1957 and 2025 might be whose team is wielding the power and whether we like their goals. So, welcome back to the Liberty Test. I'm your host, Dan Castello, joined by my fellow libertarians Karyn Thompson, Rose Leatherman, and Bob Schuon. And tonight we're examining the fundamental question, when, if ever, does the federal government have the constitutional authority and the moral authority to override state and local authority? And more importantly, how do we evaluate that question based on principle rather than politics? Who has some thoughts to start us off?
Well, I suspect we're going to get different answers depending on whether you are a libertarian minarchist or an anarchist. A lot of minarchists still believe in states' rights or local governments' rights. They believe that decentralization is better, that local communities should be able to have whatever rules they like. And if you don't like it, well, it's much easier to leave an oppressive government if it's local and you can get out of it just by moving, 20 miles to the west of it or something. Anarchists will likely have a different take on that. Once you've come to view all states, regardless of how local they are, as criminal gangs who are oppressing you, does it really matter which one you're rooting for?
Yeah.
There should be some kind of parameter to it, right? If there's absolute chaos in the streets and the state government absolutely has no control of it and it's spiraling, there may be a place for this. I mean, I'm talking riots, like 1990s LA style riots. I think it could be considered appropriate. But just high crime rates, I would say no.
Right. Like if local citizens have decided that, you know what, we don't want to prosecute things like robberies, or we don't want to prosecute things like drug use, should the federal government step in and send in their people to start arresting citizens?
Yeah, I would say definitely not.
However, on the flip side, if you just happen to be born in a particular area, you did not vote for the people currently in office, but of course, it's kind of the inherent problem with democracy. You can vote, but if the person who you voted for does not win, you are still subjected to other people's choice of politician and to their policies. If more people voted for someone who is not going to enforce laws and is not going to protect you and your means of making a living from aggressors, are you obligated to support your local government? Or is it okay to prefer to live under the federal government if they send in their agents and they start actually protecting your business when local government wouldn't do anything when, for example, your convenience store that you poured your savings and your life into building keeps getting robbed, and say you live in an area with strict gun control laws where you're not allowed to defend your property yourself. You're supposed to call the state, but the state also shows up 3 hours later and writes a report about it and doesn't actually do anything. And you could be arrested and charged if you do anything to try to defend your property. So I can understand why people might be okay with federal agents coming in and restoring order, even though that sets a potentially very dangerous precedent. Keep in mind, Yeah, keep in mind, local nullification and statewide nullification of federal laws is why we have things like legal cannabis in a lot of states. Like, imagine if the federal government said, you know what, cannabis is still illegal under federal law. This can't stand. We can't have people doing drugs because they destroy society. We're going to start sending in federal agents and arresting people who are selling cannabis or arresting people who are using it. Like, I think most people would take issue with that.
Well,
For
it
sure.
looks like I'm going to have to steelman the government's position here, like I usually do. Not saying I necessarily agree
Say
with
that.
this, but more than in some of our other conversations, I'm actually sympathetic to at least some of the rhetoric that's coming out of the federal government right now. Let me make it local first. Just a quick skimming of my Facebook feed this morning. Crime is becoming a lot more prominent than it used to, and these are petty crimes. A local park half a mile away from me in my very nice suburban neighborhood, a local neighbor was posting on Facebook that her car window was smashed in broad daylight, 5 p.m., while a bunch of people were nearby playing pickleball, and there were video cameras almost, but not quite, covering the area. And she was playing about 50 yards away with her small children. So her car window was broken open, and someone found her purse, which was, sort of hidden, underneath the dash, but not completely. And other neighbors chimed in to say they had had similar things occur. And of course, this is a petty crime, to compare to the other things that I mentioned before, but this is local. And then a little further away, in the closest major city near where I lived, Syracuse, I saw another headline, 20 masked people smashed their way into a Macy's at the mall, stole a bunch of stuff, and zoomed away. And the people in the comments were basically saying, oh, well, who cares? Macy's has insurance,
But
But
you know what the
this is
definition of petty crime is? Petty crime is crime that hasn't happened to you. That's what petty crime is. Okay? Because no crime is petty when it's happened to you, your family, your property, okay? This is like San Francisco, people leaving notes on their car with their windows open saying, please don't break my windows because there's nothing in the car. It's already been broken into and stolen. That's a breakdown of law and order at that point.
And this affects real world family decisions. My mom wants to go see a movie, and we had to decide, did we want to go see it at the mall where all the crime has been happening lately, or did we want to try and see it somewhere closer to home, but at a later time that's less convenient? So we chose the later, less convenient one because I don't want to go to that mall. Not at night,
Yeah, you don't want to be parked in the outdoor parking lot late at night there. There are daily muggings and sometimes stabbings and shootings right in the parking lot. So, yeah, I can understand why our local government has failed so spectacularly at doing what they claim to be there to do, but that courts, of course, have repeatedly ruled they don't actually have to do, which is to protect the population and to serve them. That people like the idea of federal agents coming in and actually arresting the people who are mugging people and carrying out these shootings. People want to be able to just go about their lives, go shopping, go to the movies, and not have to worry that they're going to be shot in the crossfire because two rival gangs decided to get in a shootout, or that they're not going to be mugged, or their car is not going to have its windows smashed.
Right, but
People
that's
just
because of
want to be able to-
failures of government. You know what I'm saying? It's whether it's a failure of the local government or the state government, whatever it is. I mean, let's see if everybody recognizes this.
I don't think it's a failure, though. I think it's the fact that the government exists to raise revenue for itself,
No, but
and they're
it's
out giving
deliberate
speeding
failures.
tickets and doing things that actually make money.
When
They don't care if you get
prosecutors
robbed.
in a state, and of course we live in one of the biggest nanny states there is, that refuse to prosecute crime for political reasons. Okay? So here's the quote. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the government. Next line is most important. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of those ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. Now, the
That's
question becomes...
extremism nowadays.
Yeah.
But even libertarians agree that if government should exist at all, as it says in our own platform, it has one job, and that's to
Hold our
protect
natural rights.
our rights, which basically can be summed up as life, liberty, and property. So when things can happen like we've seen on the news lately, I don't know about you guys, but this is a failure of government. So if another layer of government is willing to step in and do the job that the lower layer of government won't do, is that not justified?
The problem with it is do they stay forever?
Right.
Because as soon as they pull out, you're going to be left with your same incompetent government who's, weaponizing their political views, really, because that's what it is. They want the votes.
And
they're going to let these people walk. It doesn't fix the problem. It just stops it for a little while, in my opinion.
Looks
well,
good
that's
on
how you
TV,
end up
though.
with a perpetual state of emergency. Was it? I think
Exactly.
it was Egypt who had they'd been under state of emergency for 30 years because, of course, once the state has power, they do not willingly relinquish it.
Oh, but this is America. That can't happen here.
Yeah, that could definitely not happen here.
None of
We're
us
the land of the
ever
free.
fall for that.
Look, Trump is so old he couldn't end up being a dictator for long anyway. It's fine. It's fine.
Because the president's definitely the one calling all the shots, and there's not shadowy figures that really call the shots from behind the scenes. No, definitely not.
I don't know. The shadowy figures still seem pretty angry at Trump.
So, okay, let's look at it this way. Suppose we had a completely stateless society. People had to hire their own personal security guards from a private security guard firm. You could select from, you could go online, read their Yelp reviews, decide which ones looked the best. It was a competitive market. Suppose you hire security guards to guard your local community. Suppose one of them decides that they're going to start mugging people and they're going to start abusing their power. You probably would want an agent from headquarters to come in and stop that agent from abusing their power. So is it from the minarchist perspective, if we are going to have government and they have one job and that's uphold the rights of the people, is that really any different? Is someone from another level of government coming in to stop a corrupt local official or enforce rules that were voted into place but that corrupt local officials won't enforce? Is that really much different?
It sounds like the situation that existed, say, in New York and New Jersey with the mafia, and then the FBI stepped in.
Right, because they paid off all the local cops.
Theoretically, at least, a local problem because you had the 5 families in New York, and the federal government stepped in, and most people, I'm not saying all, but most people would probably agree that that was helpful to removing them or at least reducing their power to an extent. But on
the other hand, I do want to point out, even though we're all fans of private services, including security, Irina, the Ukrainian refugee who was murdered so dramatically on the metro in Charlotte, the security services there are actually not government. It's been private security.
Right. Well, I mean, there's a
big difference there.
Free market, yes.
Yeah, because that is a single crime, committed by someone that, even extreme security would have difficulty handling a crime like that.
Yeah.
Because it's out of the blue, without warning, with no note, without any.
Oh, there was so much warning.
Well, no, okay, but that's the state's fair. That's where the state's fair
never
comes
posted
in.
Bail.
Right.
He had called 911 himself.
Right.
Several times complaining, I need help. There's microchips in my head. They're reading my thoughts. This man should have been committed.
Well, this goes back to the mental health crisis in America because people that need help are not getting it, and they're left on the streets until their mental illness grows so large that they turn to violence.
And they stab someone randomly on a train.
Remember, there was a guy in New York. Remember that? He was committed 30 times and released 30 times until he started stabbing people on the street. Then all of a sudden, maybe he's a problem,
Oh, right, yeah. There was a woman
who was lit on fire.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a woman who was set on fire, supposedly, but a guy who supposedly was high on something. Yeah, that got quickly forgotten, I guess.
Well, but
Yeah,
it gets swept under the rug because the current
right.
political administration doesn't want people to realize that they're not safe on the streets.
Right.
And
There was a woman who pushed someone in front of a subway car years ago,
yep,
again, because she was having a mental health episode and wasn't able to get help for it. She even said, she's like, yeah, I'm insane. Maybe if I'd smoked pot today, I wouldn't have done that. But
but
Well, I
this
think we're
is
all in agreement that we don't want to end up like the Europeans, who have neutered themselves so much that crime is basically rampant over there. And anyone who even tries to defend themselves, they find themselves prosecuted. And
can't even
even
have a
speaking out
knife
about it,
without
like we are
showing
right
ID.
now, could end you up with a prison sentence in the UK. But then again, when Trump comes out and calls for the death penalty for this creature, who murdered Irina, that gets a lot of support too. So is this an example of the slippery slope where authoritarianism is being embraced by more and more people in
Right. He's,
reaction?
yeah,
well,
facing federal charges because, again, the local and state government failed so hard to get this guy off the streets when this
yeah,
is an example of someone who does need to be separated from the rest of society, at least until they can be safely reintegrated back in, because they actually were a threat to other people. They actually had violated others' rights already. So
right.
yeah,
But this is
again, this is
where
an example of the federal government stepping in and doing things that people think
well,
should
but
have
this
already
the
been done.
failure of the state or the local municipality to act according to their own charter, okay, to their
Right.
own responsibility to protect their own citizens, is that now justified? Like, is the federal government now justified in doing that, saying, well, this is it. You're not going to do anything about this. We're going to step in and take care of this.
Well,
Now,
beyond that, Bob, let's talk about what that actually looks like in practice, because I've seen calls from the federal level and from their supporters that judges should have imposed on them certain sentencing requirements that,
well,
for
they've tried
example, if
that in New
they
York for years. That
they'll
hasn't done
well, more
squat.
than that, what I saw specifically was a suggestion that if a judge, lets somebody go, in other words, like
Mhm.
like happened in this case, and then that person commits another crime, that the judge themselves should be penalized.
Well, that would actually be holding people accountable.
Is it though? Because what if in your judgment as a judge, you really honestly think this person should be free to go, but you can't, and you have to send someone who you think is innocent of this particular crime. You have to
well,
send someone to
this is
jail or
the
sentence
dilemma, isn't
them,
it?
right?
Right.
What would likely
Mandatory.
happen? Sorry, what would likely
Oh, no, go
happen
ahead.
is judges will impose very high bail or retention on everyone just to cover their own ass.
Uh-huh.
The question is,
Mandatory
though, is
minimums
that a
have been
bad thing?
tried. Like
you know.
judges are supposed to have discretion.
Mhm.
Like, for example, suppose you have a politician who's like, we're going to clear up these streets from prostitution. So therefore, we're going to have a 30-year mandatory minimum for prostitution. And then there's a judge who knows that the person in front of them was trafficked and coerced into this and therefore is not completely guilty of the crime they've been convicted of, but technically under the law, they were still guilty. But the judge, like, their hands are tied. They have to still impose the mandatory minimum. Like, you don't really want to remove all discretion from judges. But at the same time, though, like, you do end up with situations where the term activist judge gets thrown around a lot. It's not, they do exist. They exist on both sides of the political spectrum. For example, the judge that convicted Dexter Taylor said that, like, saying that the Second Amendment didn't exist in her courtroom, that sounds like an activist judge to me. Like,
More pro Second Amendment activist judges, in my opinion.
right, like, so occasionally you will get a judge who just completely fails to put away a person who actually does need to be removed from society. And then this is why you start getting calls for mandatory minimums or for
But
holding judges
here's
accountable if they release someone who shouldn't have been released.
the problem with this is that authority is the converse of responsibility. You cannot have one without the other. The problem we have, especially with the state as it exists, is that they give people like judges authority. But where is the responsibility? And this is why one of the reasons that certain people are saying this is that, okay, if a judge has no responsibility to not only society, but to the people they themselves judge, then how it doesn't, the scales don't balance anymore. Okay. The problem is if you have a judge that's let 5 murderers in a row out, okay, well, you're not going to do it again. Okay, great, good, go. Okay. You create a society where justice is not served, not to most people's thinking anyway, and then you get a situation where the populace can, will, and has taken things into their own hands, and that's not good either. This is, again, if you're going to support government authority in protecting rights, okay, but then government has to perform that job. Otherwise, you get people doing it on their own. And whether you're agreeing or disagreeing with that, that's what happens. Like, there's a real world aspect to a lot of this that, we could say, yeah, the system should work as it's supposed to, as, technically realize, yes, passe comitatus. That is the law that states that the U.S. government is not allowed to go into a state without the governor inviting them in. That's why Trump is going to lose the L.A. case. I guarantee it, because unless he can prove that they either deliberately or were so incompetent that they couldn't handle the situation, the U.S. federal government is prohibited by law from going in there to do this.
Weren't there some laws passed after 9/11 that gave them backdoor permission?
It's possible, but if so,
Probably
I don't know how they
The year
override
2011 is sticking out in my mind. I'm gonna see if I can find it.
There are laws on top of laws on
Well,
top
that's the
of.
problem. Is there's so many laws
There,
you can
yeah.
justify
There's something.
anything.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
There's
like,
always some fine print somewhere saying that under exigent circumstances you can do this one thing. Maybe it'll be challenged, but then it'll take years to work its way through the courts.
and besides
then,
that, by the time all that's done, it's already over. Because again,
exactly.
by the time this makes its way through the court system and finally gets to the Supreme Court, which is where most of this is all going to end up, okay, by that time he'll be out of office. So what are you going to say? Okay, bad government, you did this. Again, where's the responsibility here? Because again, presidents don't get held personally responsible because it's part of their office, and they're specifically exempted from that, and they have immunity. So it's a case of, at what point in real life, without going too deep into the legal implications, at what point does the government have the right / responsibility to override the individual states or towns or cities or villages or whatever? Because, again, you have perfect example. You have state police. State police will override the city cops all the time. You know what I mean? They'll just walk right in and take over. And what is that, in terms of, do they have the authority for that? So.
Well,
you guys familiar with the NDAA? That authorized indefinite detention of terrorist suspects,
I
including
remember
US citizens.
people ignored this. This was not widely reported. No one was talking about it. You had to be part of, you had to follow certain sources to even find out this was a thing.
You had to
yes,
be a libertarian
US
citizens to oppose this. It's like
U.S. citizens living within the country could be picked up and indefinitely detained.
Yep.
Well, according to the research that I can do quickly while we're on the air, it looks like the Insurrection Act is still the main legal bypass. But since 9/11, there have been some workarounds that give president and three-letter
Clear are they on what
leeway.
constitutes an insurrection?
And how do you?
Well, it was used in 1957 to allow black students to be integrated into a whites-only school.
Right. Again, okay.
Was that
Go
ever
ahead.
legally challenged? I mean, that's the question. It's like, because I know it was done, but was it ever challenged in court.
Well, let's use a more explicit example that everyone could get behind. The 1871 Ku Klux Klan Act, or the 1992 LA riots.
Well, this is where, different circumstances, right? The LA riots. I mean, I don't know. Did the governor of California or the mayor of Los Angeles want help, or was that refused and they went in over their authority?
That's a good question.
Great question.
I think that in the South, the Ku Klux Klan Act, was railroaded through under, Reconstruction.
Right.
So, you could argue that there wasn't legitimate representation, although I would argue that the existing and prior representation wasn't legitimate to begin with either. So that's complex. But I think as far as the LA riots are concerned, I stand under correction. Anybody maybe in the comments can correct me here, but I think the federal government was permitted, by local authorities to operate.
Right.
And even then, a lot of it, people still were left to defend themselves. I mean, there are the famous rooftop Koreans. Yeah. At that time, they were still at least allowed to own guns and allowed to fire warning shots. That would probably in California get you arrested nowadays, but they were able to successfully defend their property. Nowadays, you'll get the local government, not only will they fail to protect you, they will arrest you for trying to protect yourself.
Yeah, but again, go ahead.
The difference in that and then just taking care of street crimes is that they had an acute situation. And I do feel like that's probably often appropriate. It would have been appropriate in Minneapolis during the George Floyd riots. I could think of half a dozen times.
Local governments refused in most cases too, because I think there were people who thought they could use the riots for their political gain, so they allowed them. But people refused, and a number of regular people were assaulted or had their small businesses destroyed. Yeah. And
I think in that situation, it would not bother me. But then they fix the situation and they leave.
And
that
has to be
taking over policing.
Yeah.
So
but it sets the precedent, though, that federal government good. It normalizes having federal agents in your city, which is concerning.
But maybe it's necessary, at least to restore a condition under which more normal operations can be undertaken.
In the same way, you'd want the rogue private security agent to be prosecuted or at least stopped by higher-ups.
And one would hope that once order was restored, sanity would return, and the people of that area would then vote the people who were basically abrogating their rights out of office, because that's where hopefully our system readjusts itself. You know what I mean? One of the things you're starting to see now in DC is whether or not you agree with what Trump has done there, you have a lot of people who are actually saying, yes, the city is safe, the government did the right thing. And will that now change their voting demographic and possibly for the first time ever have a different party come into power in Washington, D.C.?
Well, I would agree with that whole framework if we all take it for granted that voting actually accomplishes what it's supposed to.
That's
precisely, which that's a whole other can of worms.
That's a different podcast. We'll get into
Once you're assuming people can change their minds given new information, which people kind of do not do that.
Yeah, but we're starting to see it. We're starting to see it.
Let me frame it a little bit differently, though. What we're talking...
Sorry, I have a delay.
Okay, what we're talking about here is the government at whatever level having the authority to step in and impose its will. Now, any action is going to be based on some kind of principle. Now, we're coming at it from a libertarian principle. Obviously, people's lives and their property are under threat in a riot situation or a Ku Klux Klan situation, and we're okay with whatever level of government doing whatever is necessary, within the law to restore order. But ideology isn't always aligned with libertarian values, right? So when Governor Hochul says we're about to face a climate crisis and no one should be allowed to have, you know, anything other than approved government heat now, you know, should she be allowed to send in, the state troopers to take away your wood burning stove? I'm not saying she's doing that right now, but I'm saying that under the
today.
framework we're discussing,
Right,
Maybe
it's
next
the
week.
we would
same.
defend that.
Same with the cannabis thing, with the federal agents and the state's legalization policies. Yeah, like if you live in a town where local officials are saying this is stupid, we're not going to enforce this stupid wood burning stove ban. Like, yeah, you are facing potentially agents of the state police coming in to confiscate your wood burning stove or fine you for owning one or whatever they've
Let's
decided.
give a real example. COVID.
Right, but look at what happens, okay? Short term, that will work. Longer term, as the government found out, then people begin to push back. And the longer it goes, the more people push back. And the more people will abandon those leaders due to the fact that their interests are not being listened to, being
It took a
observed.
long time, though.
Yeah, that's
Well,
a
it took
small
longer than it
consolation
should
for
have.
people who had their businesses destroyed and
But
who were
that's
barred from
because
earning a living and lost everything.
this was a coordinated effort. This was
Right.
This was literally, you don't want to say that it was planned from the get go, but it's hard
There
to
were
not
some
say that.
powerful entities who benefited immensely from COVID policies and tried to stretch it out as long as they could.
Exactly.
So yeah, imagine if hypothetically we had a federal government that at least pretended to care about constitutional rights. Imagine that Trump actually had a set of balls on him and had said, you know what? Yeah, other countries are locking people down and telling you can't leave your house, but this is America. We're not going to do that here. And we will crack down on any state politicians who try to lock their citizens down. And imagine if federal agents had come in and dragged Cuomo out of his mansion and arrested him for trying to lock down the state. Like, I don't think most of us would have a problem with that, because this is a situation where federal government is actually
Me not having a problem with
protecting
that.
our right to liberty better than state politicians are.
Rule
Once-
number one for the president is to maintain order, safety of its citizens and their liberties. And
Right.
yeah, again, if you look at it, and not to be left, right, or in the middle, but if the election would not have gone the way it did in 2020, okay, do you think it would have lasted like 4 years? No, I highly, highly doubt that. I mean, it'd be-
Probably, but
But this is the point: is that can the government take actions for the benefit of its citizens? Yes, they can. They can also not take actions that are benefits to citizens. The question is, how do you tell which? Like which? How do you? And the problem
It
is now
seems like that is the purpose of the federalist infrastructure, the whole framework, the balance of powers, the different levels of authority, the court system. Something's broken somewhere, though, because it's not working the way it's supposed to.
well, once you become an anarchist, the question is, does it matter? Once you realize that all the state is the gang that won, it's a criminal gang that has the justified monopoly on force. They have the right to rob you and call it taxation. They have the right to enslave you, call it a draft. They have the right to abduct you and call it an arrest. So you realize, does it really matter which one I side with? No, I don't support either the state government, the local government, or the federal government. However, I'm not, whichever one happens to be not aggressing against me, and whichever one happens to be upholding my rights to liberty, life, and property, the best is the one that I will support at
least
this
to an
moment in
extent.
time.
Isn't that what most of the country does? They they root for whoever's doing what they would do in their
They
part.
Doing the least
don't think
damage is
far. They don't
basically
think
what it
very
is.
far ahead, though. They think that they should be codified into law. They're like, oh, I don't like this thing that happened. I like what the federal government's doing. There ought to be a law that enshrines their right to do that permanently. And then they don't realize They don't think like 2 years ahead when someone they don't like is in office and now they have that same power.
But under the framework you're discussing, it really doesn't matter what the legal precedent is. They'll just find an excuse, some kind of fig leaf, to do whatever they want to do anyway.
Right. My point is, though, okay, if, for example, the state government is oppressing me and the federal government comes in, I'm not obligated to oppose the federal government coming in. I'm not obligated to get behind my state government and say that this is an outrage that they're coming in and messing with our elected officials, because I did not consent to being ruled over by those elected officials. So, but yes, at the same time, I also recognize that the federal government is equally a threat because they could just as easily come in and say that they're going to enforce a law that the state or local governments nullified.
I think ultimately government at any level will keep pushing for more power because even if they're the best people in the world, they need power in order to do their job. So why would they turn down more power? That makes them more effective, right? So I think ultimately what keeps any government, even a good one, in check is the ability of people to circumvent the government's will. So there needs to be a balance. Obviously, if the government is so weak that everybody can do anything they want with impunity, that's anarchy in the not way that we mean it. That's like violence and
Chaos. The word
chaos
you're
and
looking at is
stuff.
chaos.
you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You usually see that in a failing state, though. You see that when there's a power vacuum that was created because the state existed and the framework is there, but the current state will not enforce certain laws, but they will enforce others, which is
Right.
what's happening here.
But
People,
now
like, they'll enforce things like prosecuting you for owning a gun without a license, but they will not prosecute people who are mugging you or robbing your store or breaking into your car.
they are prosecuting threats to their power and authority in order to
Precisely.
maintain it, and they
If
do
you
more of
committed
that sort of
tax
thing.
evasion, they care.
They
If
do
you're
more of that
speeding,
sort
they
of
can
thing
make
when it's
money.
slipping away. When their authority is diminishing, that's when they try and grip tighter. And yet, when that's the situation, law and order is also suffering, like what we're talking about, more violence, more theft, that kind of thing. And there will be some subset of the population that encourages the government to get more power for itself. And unfortunately, that wave can be ridden by bad politicians as well as good ones who want to use the increase in authority for their own corrupt purposes. I think there's every reason to believe that that's exactly what's happening right now at all levels of government.
Right, but the population of an area or region also does have a say, at least in our system, and thank goodness for that, because again, the founders being smart enough to try to restrict government at least to an extent. Okay, you have a system where imagine the scenario you were talking about in Chicago. Okay, do you think the populace themselves will support the Chicago mayor? Or do you think the populace is going to support the federal government trying to bring order back on the street? And it, unless they're completely insane, okay, people most of the time will support order. Because again, they want to be secure in their homes, in their persons, in their daily lives, and having street criminals released, even though they've committed violent acts, gangs on the streets, breaking into your property, taking what you have, breaking into your homes, the Colorado thing where gangs are literally taking over apartment buildings. Okay, at that point, most people will support the government using force to come in and stop it. This is the realism part, is that whether or not the Supreme Court in the end says this is legal, illegal, whatever, okay, people don't want to be murdered, killed, raped, robbed in their homes and in their communities. Now, in a libertarian system, the populace would be armed and would be able to much more effectively resist this sort of thing.
Right, and we'd be able to at least hire security guards who are there for a specific purpose, and that's to protect us and our property, but not arrest us if we, for example, are in possession of a substance arbitrarily declared illegal, or you have chickens without a permission slip, or you're selling something without a permission slip. Yeah,
And
you'd
those
have
services would be more
protection
affordable.
without being extorted constantly.
Mhm. What we're
Yeah.
doing is paying for protection from a monopoly.
Mhm.
Government has the monopoly on protection. If someone tries to protect themselves now, they have to answer to the government. They basically get permission from the authorities in order to exercise their own right to self-defense. So when you remove that impediment and people can choose for themselves how to exercise that right, yeah, I think most of them will still hire somebody else, outside
Right.
help.
Most of us don't want to have to constantly, like, we don't have to stand at home and guard our house all day. We'd like to outsource that to hire private security guards. Or maybe some communities would prefer to have a neighborhood watch style system.
Then again,
Point is, though, yeah,
But you're describing a market system where that is ultimately going to keep people more honest because
where you can
customers
fire
can
the
leave.
security guards if they're not properly doing their job, or if they steal from you or something.
Another angle of this problem that the government has created is like the Daniel Penny situation, where you see something going down and you're perfectly prepared and able to step in.
You can't.
You might not.
Because you know that you could be arrested. And even though he was ultimately acquitted, as they
Right.
say, the process is the punishment. Like, he still had to spend how many dollars, like how many thousands of dollars getting legal
Daniel
counsel. He still
Penny,
had to,
Bernie Getz.
he had
Okay,
to
all
spend
those
time in
people.
jail. Like, he lost tons of, like, he lost how many years of his life to this. And he's also still subject now to civil lawsuits, which is ridiculous. He was found innocent of criminal wrongdoing, but he can still be sued by the family members of the guy who was threatening to kill people on a subway, and who everyone who was on that car said was an active threat. And they said that Daniel Penny probably just saved their lives. But family members who are eager to make a buck can still step in and try to sue him.
Is this a problem because of the way the system is arranged, or would this be an unavoidable problem in any dense urban area with lots of strangers who don't know each other and who rely on systems in lieu of trust and reputation in order to navigate situations like this? Like in a small town where everybody knew everybody.
Well, see, that's the difference. Is that the one thing that large cities bring is, I'll call it impersonality. Okay, you don't know your neighbors, you don't know the guy down the street. That it becomes a case of loss of humanity. Okay, to an extent, and that's just part of a city life. I mean, because you physically, it's impossible to know more than a tiny fraction of the people that live in your area, let alone the entire city. Um, Part of this is simply for business reasons, but it's also that, look at the things that go on with New York City versus the rest of the state. The the city has literally coerced the suburbs into supporting the city. Against it. There was big fights, like Long Island with the transit authority and all that, are basically extorting people from Long Island and Westchester to pay for New York City Transit, whether they like it or not, because they rely on that to get to and from their jobs in the city. Now, what's interesting here is that now you're starting to see, because of remote work and all of that, there's less and less of a justification for that, because the transit systems that go into the city, if they were on their own, would not be losing money, but they have to pay it into the city to pay for public transit and all the things, whether or not they feel it's justified. So this is one of those problems where the city becomes like a big vacuum, sucking in all the things from everywhere else, and then of course begins to become the dog, the tail that wags the dog.
But is the
gangs
libertarian
always expand
solution
their
to just move out
territory
to the
and
country?
expand their influence.
Well, this is the beauty of remote work, is it's actually bringing in, at least to an extent, a bit more of a libertarian type society, because I don't have to go into the city to work.
Most
I can
people
work
don't
from-
want to live under oppressive government if they
Right.
can get away from it. And this is an example.
I don't know. I think a lot of people in dense urban areas love the nanny state.
They do until
Only-
it comes
only
for
if-
something they care about.
Yeah.
And then they finally get their wake up call when the state finally tells them that they can't do something that they enjoyed that was
When they
not
stop
hurting anyone
benefiting.
else.
Yep, when they stop
Yeah.
benefiting from it, then all of a sudden the attitude changes.
Then
And
they
that's when
suddenly
riot,
realize.
and then they get mollified. You know, you go out and you riot until you get your benefits back.
Yeah. That's like, but that's like a child throwing a tantrum and breaking stuff.
Yes, they're
It's literally
childlike.
is.
The
It
people
doesn't
who
have to be
embrace
benefits. It
that
can just
type
be
of
the state. It can be the state suddenly stepping in and deciding that that thing you've been doing for your whole life that you use to make a living, that suddenly requires a license, or they can suddenly decide that something
always say
that
that.
you're doing that doesn't hurt anybody else is now illegal because some other moral busybody decided it was a problem. Like, most people, they have to be personally affected before they realize how bad the state really is.
Yeah. And they'll champion almost anything from their team.
Right, because, most people don't even think about things. They just, if their
Yeah.
team supports it, it's good.
Yeah.
If the other team supports the exact same thing, suddenly it's bad.
Well, this is
Yeah.
part of the problem, is that people blindly follow this system where it's either or, it's a binary yes or no. It's like, it doesn't work that way. Like, that's not real life. There are no concrete walls between positions. It's always a scale of gray, one way to the other, and there are positions outside of that, and this is also, it's our strength as well as our weakness, because people want simple lives. They don't want to have to think. They tend to want the simplest solution without having to do a deep dive and investigating. And if you had to do a whole research project into your candidates, everything they do. Now, we do that, obviously, but how many other people actually do? Because again, it's work. It's extra work that they don't want to do, and this is where it's easier to just pick a side, and they're encouraged to do so, and they're programmed to do so by the state.
Well,
because
that's why the whole
benefits
idea
state,
of consent of the governed is highly questionable at best.
Well,
Well,
that's just
what you guys
laziness.
decide has no bearing on me, or at least it shouldn't. If the
Shouldn't,
three of
yes.
you decide to live by one set of rules, fine, that governs the three of you.
Right. You
You
want the
outlaw.
local school to own the golf course for several $1,000,000 that they don't need to own. Fine. You pay for that with your money. You agreed to having your taxes go up. Why should that affect the rest of us?
But you live here, you're part of the community, and you benefit from good schools that own golf courses
Why does the school need to own a golf course? What does that do for my child's
so
education?
that they can
Like,
expand the sports facilities.
And
And
the
maybe
Buffalo
later,
football stadium. Come on,
what does
like,
that
let's
have to
go.
do with my kid's
Yeah,
education?
it's ridiculous.
I don't know, but
Want it, you pay for it.
we need a new aquarium. We need
That'll bring
a
money to
giant
the city, we
microchip
promise.
plant.
We're getting back into
Yes,
territory
people
of
have to have their houses seized without consent and paid probably the bare minimum market value so that we can have a micron factory, because we promise that we're not just being paid off by lobbyists. This is actually going to benefit your city somehow. We promise.
Yeah.
until they go
So this is
bankrupt.
way beyond life, liberty, and property protection.
Well, now we get into
Well, that's property,
one of
but-
our other future discussions, which is probably, should government own businesses outside of government? Because
yeah.
that's going to be a whole nother topic that we are definitely going to have to tackle at some point. Because
Well, ultimately, who owns something? It's the person who can destroy that thing or dispose of it at their own will, right? So when the government, under the guise of protection or offering protection services, gets to decide how you use your own property, is it your own property?
Right.
And so when we invite in any level of government that isn't really directly accountable to us, except maybe through courts and voting, which are definitely imperfect and so far removed from the individual, that it's so expensive to seek justice, or your influence is so diluted, one man, one vote doesn't mean much, right?
Right.
So ultimately you're you're not a citizen at that point. You're a subject. You're maybe even a serf if you get attached to your job or your land, and can be traded by the different armed gangs. So I'm torn. As a libertarian, I see all this, but as a father, as a son, as a family man, I see my community devolving. And I ask, like, what is the libertarian solution? Because here's Trump, he's offering an actual solution. He will put armed people on the street corners and
And we
keep them
would
safe.
arm the people.
And ideally, that park where people were having their cars broken into, that would be privately owned. If you wanted to make use of that park, you'd pay maybe a yearly subscription fee to it, or you'd pay at the gate or whatever. So there would be a natural filtering mechanism to keep out people who were just going to do things like litter or break things or break into people's cars or just generally be a nuisance.
You know how
But
this sounds, though, right? To most bleeding hearts, including half the libertarians. They say, well, what about people who can't afford the park? Shouldn't
we
there
already
be
pay
public
for it.
spaces?
Oh, we already pay for it with our tax dollars.
Well, what about the homeless people, the people with drug addictions that they're not in control of, who end up in these situations through no fault of their own? Shouldn't we allow them to at least have some space that they can just be and not have the police come in and, get rid of them? Aren't libertarians in favor of, getting rid of the police?
Ask the people that like to walk through the parks in Washington D.C. about that and how that works. Because again, this is what was happening: is endless homeless encampments. Because first of all, the government uh, basically restricts the health care to the point where people with serious mental illnesses can't get true health care. Then they go on and put them on the street, and now they're in camps. So that park is now a homeless encampment, and the people that are actually paying the taxes on that do not get the enjoyment of it, and then they're also subject to the crime and to the all the other things that come along with that. So at what point, does in the existing system, at least does the government have a responsibility to maintain order in that circumstance?
It is their system. This is the way they want it. You're right. They do have to at least step in and protect.
Right. I mean, the legal stuff we know is going to go on for years. Whether they're allowed, whether they're not allowed, they're going to have it in front of a million courts, and the one political side will say yes, and the other political side will say no, and who knows where it's all going to end up.
Well, Karen, to your point, you're saying this is temporary, right? So what's the real
We would hope.
Well,
Yeah,
one would
you're
hope.
right. Yeah, let's hope that it's temporary and not the start of the first galactic empire. What is the actual libertarian solution, and why does that work better? Why do free people making their own decisions in a free market, why does that result in better quality of life for nearly everyone?
I think when it comes to the case of mentally ill, drug addicted, the usual suspects, the chronic sect of people who destroy the quality of life for all of those around them, I think that there should be something along the lines of, like, I don't know, if your counties have drug court, or you're on probation, okay, but you need to see your doctor and you need to follow your doctor's orders type thing. And then they may end up incarcerated, but they do have a choice not to. And then they also have these services that are going to be right in front of them and free.
Right.
It just seems like such a no-brainer to me.
Because
and then, yes, if they refuse treatment, you do have to put them somewhere. You do, because the rest of us...
Libertarians believe in mutual aid. Like, we believe in helping people who need help, but at the same time, like, okay, people should be free to do what they want in their private lives. If you want to do drugs in your own private spaces, that's fine. It doesn't necessarily follow that other people should have to deal with you if they're just trying to enjoy a nice...
yourself or others.
If they're trying to enjoy a nice day out at the park that they're being forced to pay for, they should be able to at least use that park for its intended purposes. So if we're going to have a government at all, yes, they should, like, if someone is disrupting everyone else's ability to make use of the park, yes, they should be removed from that park. It doesn't mean that they should be in jail, but they should be given options. Like you can go to this homeless shelter, they offer treatment programs, but you can't hang out in the park and get high and annoy everyone else or break into cars for your next fix or whatever.
Right. We can sympathize with the people who are in these unfortunate circumstances, and we can offer them help. But, without criminalizing the drug use itself, we can still protect life and property from the actions those people will take that violates property rights and
100%.
You know?
And it's usually the same people committing small-ish crimes like that over and over and over. They're habitual.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point, they do need to be put into some kind of strict program where if you're going to continue to mingle with us, like, get it in check.
Yeah, get your shit together and become a productive member of society if you want to remain part of this particular community.
Yeah.
Do you think that exiling or banishing people from a community is a realistic option in the modern world? Or do people have to be incarcerated, whether in an actual prison or in some kind of involuntary program?
Now you bring up history. Okay, everybody's heard of Robin Hood, right? Okay, no, listen, hear me out. Okay, Robin Hood was an outlaw, but very, very few people these days understand what that term actually meant. That's when you're an outlaw, that means not only did the law not apply to you because you were outside of it, but it could not benefit you as well. When you were an outlaw, you were basically told, you are not part of this society, and anything that happens to you is on you. No one will support you. No one will help you. No one will come to your assistance. And that, to me, sounds like a pretty powerful psychological motivator to, hey, if I mess with these people and they declare me outlaw, first of all, they're going to run you out of town. That's realistically, it's like, get out. And if you come around here, we're going to take actions to make sure you never come around again. But it will then basically prevent you from having any of the benefits of a society, of a community. And
right, you could opt out, basically. You
go right ahead, but
the state wouldn't come after you for property taxes or for licensing to live off the land and sell your product and
I don't know, but if you lived off the land and somebody said, no, that's mine, they could just take care of it and you would have no recourse. Like, that's the whole point of being, like, outlaw is literally that you're on your own, and if anybody has a problem with you, they can just do whatever they want.
Okay, Bob, hold on. I love what you're saying, and that's my personal view, but I have to step in and try and steelman the opposition here. You are advocating for roaming hordes of exiled biker gangs. All these people who have been kicked out of civilization are going to roam the wastelands outside urban areas and engage in crime and murder and rape.
What do you think's really going to happen? Okay, because everybody remembers in the Westerns the posse. The posse is what actually happens, because a couple of these guys start doing stuff and becoming a problem, and very shortly thereafter there aren't a problem anymore because enough people will get together.
But the drug addicts will all just die. They would just die.
Yeah, basically.
That's not compassionate.
You're so heartless, you libertarians. You're so heartless.
No. Because again, keep in mind what happened first. See, this is where if you choose to go against society, go against your community, and hurt other people, steal their stuff, then if you insist on continually doing this, you recidivist and continuing to do this, society does have a right to cast you out because you're a danger to them.
It's like schizophrenic, and you're not at the wheel here.
Well, this is where there
This is why we want
you're a wild animal.
Yes.
If there's a wild animal rooting through the trash, I mean, yeah, it's more humane to try and trap that wild animal, but if it's attacking your kids
What
You
do
know,
Yeah,
do?
you can
Right.
defend yourself, and there is proportionate.
And that's
there is
why.
proportionate force. If it's attacking you, yeah, you'd be justified in
Yes,
using lethal
there
force.
are
If you can trap and remove it, then that's what you should do.
there were and are charities that, again, that would basically take these people and keep them, do their best to cure them as best they can, but they would be kept out of society.
I
And
think when
the
you look
problem,
at history, though, a lot of these charities started that way. And then through their luxury belief ideas making the rounds through the upper class, they eventually infected government and politicians, whether it was legitimate that they believed this or they just thought it was a way to curry favor. They started taking over the duties of these charities and saying, oh, look
oh
how
yeah,
good we are as
Well, what
government.
happened? Yes, they stepped in and they regulated most of the mutual aid societies out of existence. Like mutual aid societies used to have their own hospitals. They had,
right.
like, as part of as one of the benefits of belonging to one of these societies, you had access to their doctors. That was regulated out of existence. Slowly, the state started taking over the functions of the mutual aid society now that you were being taxed and forced to pay for things like welfare or unemployment. Not only were you already paying, so you couldn't afford to sign up with a local mutual aid society, but why would you bother? You're already being forced to
Well,
pay
but
for it, and now you can get it through the state. So why would you bother? So these things became obsolete, and now
that's how you
ultimately the state
usurp the
has a
system.
monopoly, and they don't even have to do a good job with it.
Mhm.
Okay, there's no guarantee that if you get suddenly laid off from your job, you're going to get the unemployment that you had to pay into your whole life. There's no guarantee that once you finally reach retirement age, you're going to have anything in your Social Security, that you're going to get any payments from it.
Or they will pay you
But
exactly the dollar value of what they owe you, but will those
No, no,
dollars
no,
be
no,
worth
no, no,
will
anything?
that
no,
even
no,
be a
no.
thing when we retire? Probably not.
They will give
Currently,
you the
that's what's
number of
happening.
dollars that you're supposed to have, but
That
those
yeah,
dollars
that's
won't
been
buy as
passed by
much.
an arbitrary law
Mhm.
that says, because again, they don't owe you anything. That's very clear in the law. Is that it's not like you have a savings account. It's we're taking this money from you now, and when you retire, we have a schedule of payments that we'll make to you, which may or may not correspond to anything in real life in terms of costs or anything like that. And and if you
But
don't
aren't
do
these
it,
programs a great way to prevent the sort of criminality that we were just decrying? Like, isn't it
no.
better if grandma doesn't have to become an outlaw?
Yeah. Oh God.
Grandma wouldn't be an outlaw under a normal system, because again, they would have their families, they would have mutual aid, they would get rid of minimum wage laws, and grandma could be out sweeping the street and making a couple of bucks here and there and talking to her friends, rather than being shut up in a home where she doesn't barely gets to see daylight, with a bunch of impersonal attendants that, while they do their best, and I make no, the people that work there, uh, believe me, they have great hearts, but
Don't they just need
three
more funding, Bob?
three attendants for 500 people. Yeah, that's it. Let's throw money. Let's throw some dollars at them. Right?
Always the answer.
It's
Well,
always the
look, I
answer.
mean,
Well, that's the thing about
Next thing
mutual
you're
there
aid
going to say
was
is
an
societies.
for the
argument
children.
that
So
there was an argument that could have been made decades ago, and it was made that this society is more humane and better. But I think the last few decades have proven that
it's
that socialist
completely,
utopia is impossible,
it's
and it just
completely.
devolves into what we're seeing now. And it's not even as bad here in the United States as it is overseas, but it's getting there, and states like New York are leading the pack.
Yep. And
And
what
I'm
happens is
sorry,
the
Roseanne, to
services go
remind you.
down every year. The services go down, the costs go up, and you're in this sliding scale. It's like it's like the cable companies nowadays. They just quietly pull channels away. Doop, doop, doop. Oh no, you don't need that one. Doop, and you're paying more and more money every year, but you're getting less and less for it. And
They
But
it's
had a
Bob, that's a
monopoly
private
on it, and
company.
they didn't have to provide a good service.
well, that's
Similar to how your state government doesn't have to provide a good service, and then bringing us back to our main point, suddenly you have this justification for sending in the feds.
right.
Yeah.
But the
But they don't
question
have to provide a good service either. Eventually, you're just being oppressed by multiple levels of the same criminal gang.
the question becomes: is it justified? And when is it justified? This
And
is,
when does it end?
and when does it end? This is
It
this is one of
ends
the things.
when
And
people put their foot down, which
well, this is
Canadian truckers.
Oh,
Yeah,
Lord.
but see, don't even
It
talk
ends
about the
when the
truckers
people
because
running the state no
this,
longer benefit and they start to actually fear that people are getting sick of their shit and aren't going to tolerate more of
They
it.
are
They will
afraid.
push as hard as they can. Problem is,
Yeah.
they tend to crack down harder and harder before they back off. They
But
will
realize
isn't
do what they
giving
can
Trump
to
the
maintain their
authority?
power.
Isn't allowing Trump the authority and cheering him on actually giving him the exact tools he needs, or
Yes,
his successor?
yes.
yeah. Well, the problem with giving government ultimate authority is if you have a person who is relatively benign, okay, and or actually believes in uh, freedom and liberty for the people to their own extent, and I'm not saying that's true of anyone currently in office, but then you may have not necessarily a bad outcome, but some things may get done. The problem you have is once you've done that, now you get somebody in office who doesn't believe any of that and who decides that they want to be the ultimate authority, then you end up like we have in New York, where the governor can say anything they want, pass any law that they want. We have no say whatsoever. They will never be removed from office, at least the way things currently stand, without a major collapse of
Until
New York
someone
State.
powerful wants them gone.
Until
Otherwise,
somebody
no.
powerful wants them gone. But
Yes.
again, in New York, I think we're probably gonna see a major collapse of the New York State because at some point they're not going to be able to pay for everything. The tax revenue is going down the tubes. Okay, businesses do not have presence in New York State like they used to. They just leave. People leave. Where does the tax base go?
And
Okay.
Bob, let's be specific what you mean by collapse, because we're not talking Mogadishu. We're
No.
talking
What
like what
will happen is
happened in the
the
Soviet
continuing
Union.
of less and less services, more and more restrictions, more and more licensing, more and more fees until something happens. Now,
Hmm.
we hope that something is not violence, but if you look at San
Look
Francisco,
at history,
Chicago,
though. That's
yeah,
frequently what happens.
it's frequently it happens all the time. And
So it sounds like the best way to fix the system is also the best way to protect yourself in case that system collapses, whether partially or totally, right? So what would that consist of? What actions can an individual take?
well, first of all, how about reducing the power of government as much as possible?
Being
Stop
Yeah, but
able to
voting
exist
for more,
outside of the
more, more.
system, not having to rely on government services rather than having to rely on them for food aid. Make friends with people in
Well,
your
this
local
is
networks, meet like-minded individuals, have a system set up where you guys will help each other out if you're in a bad spot. Um, yeah,
go in
have
together
the
and buy
means
a
to,
cow, get a freezer so you can store a few
or if
months
you
worth of.
can't, know someone who has a cow, and then maybe you have skills that you could trade them. They give you milk, you give them other services. Like,
ironically
yeah,
And I'm not
talk
be
to
saying
able
you
your
have
to
to be a
neighbors.
not
prepper,
have
but
to be
having
reliant on
water.
the state.
Talk to
Yeah.
your neighbors. Find out the people in your neighborhood because, again, it starts with your community. It starts with you locally. Nothing's going to happen if you try and fight the state or the federal government on your own. It's you
I
against.
don't know that I would take that to neighborhood level. And I'll tell you why. Because every neighborhood has weirdos. I have a guy who lives around the corner from me. He lives apparently alone in a 2,200 square foot house.
Mhm.
He's got a Gadsden flag on his lawn and a Homeland Security truck on his driveway. I don't want to know that guy.
Well, that's. But I'm
Oh
not
yeah,
saying
I don't want to know
every
my
They got some
next
neighbor.
door
interesting
neighbors
stories to
either,
tell.
Again,
frankly.
there is a little bit of caution here.
I want to know like-minded individuals who I can actually
Yes,
rely
Yes,
on
yes,
in a
people
shit
that
hits the fan situation.
and
because
and
that guy concerns me.
I
now.
guess what I'm looking for is how can an individual without, because right now I think concerned people go online and they say somebody oughta dot
Mhm.
dot dot. And then
Right.
what? Old man shouts at cloud, right?
No, the problem is the opposite, and that brings me to my point this evening, is that our oath when you become a libertarian, when you join officially the party, I hereby certify that I do not believe in or advocate the initiation of force as a means of achieving political and social goals. And the problem is that today, someone decided to murder someone else for politics because they didn't like what they were saying. And that is not only beyond the pale, but what you are doing is literally ripping the guts out of society, because now you have a person whose wife, small children are left without their father. You're taking what is an intellectual discussion and turning it into war, into violence, into pure, unadulterated, and invalid violence. It's so ridiculous. Okay, it does not help society in any way, shape, or form. It's one thing if you have a leader who's murdering children, okay, who are locking up the citizenry and throwing away the key. That's one thing. But you have someone sitting there discussing reasonable points, logical points, whether you agree or not. Violence is not justified for that, and I cannot say that strongly enough. It is
right. It crosses a particular line when you could make the argument that, yeah, if someone is an agent of the state who is, or yeah, has played a role in war crimes being committed, has played a role in people being aggressed against, or they're a CEO of a weapons manufacturing company, you at least can understand the argument that that person was guilty of aggressing against other people. Someone who is just sharing their personal views, no matter how distasteful you may find them, which, yeah, I did not agree with Charlie Kirk. I did not like the person. However, you're getting into some very murky territory when you say, oh, well, I don't like his views, and therefore he was directly causing other people to be aggressed against. You could make that argument for just about anyone then. Oh, I don't like your views. You're therefore dangerous and you're a threat to me, so I can commit violence against you. That is where you get
happens
into
then?
some
See,
very...
that's the problem. Is now
That's
now
a
that
line
this
that you
happens,
do not want crossed.
right? Because what happens then? Now, what's the response to that? Okay,
People are going to start going after people who they perceive as being on
again,
the other team, who they think are a
where
danger.
does it end? And then how do you
Nowhere
come
good.
back from that? Right? Because if you treat, because when you commit that kind of violence against someone, okay, how that means that you do not think they are a human being. Okay? There is no way that when you do an act like that you believe that they are a human being. Okay? And that's one of the other things that when we talk about our platform, a human being understands and respects the rights of others. Okay? So when you break that rule, when you go against that, you are nothing more than an animal yourself. Okay? Because you are breaking the one covenant of being a human being, is respecting the rights of others and respecting their life. So this is the kind of thing that, like I said, like Charlie Kirk, hate Charlie Kirk, it doesn't matter. It's not acceptable. And this is already, the problem is that people of a certain mindset, and it's the left, okay? It's the people that believe in socialist and maximum government and control, that believe that they are justified in murdering other people just so that they can score some weirdo political point. And that is a sickness. Going to violence is one of the reasons that libertarians are so opposed to initiating force, is that if you look at other individuals as people, how do you initiate force against them? They're people. They have the same feelings and dreams and desires you do.
Well,
Okay?
that's the problem. This is an issue with political polarization. You get a situation where people stop recognizing people who they perceive as being on the opposite team as them as being humans. Okay, dehumanization, there's a process involved, but yeah, once people stop recognizing one another as people, Once they said, you know what, no debate. These guys don't share our values. They're a threat to us. We're not even going to talk to them. It makes it so much easier to otherize people who you perceive as being on the other team and ultimately dehumanize them. And then from there, it becomes much easier to justify acts of aggression.
So you're saying that somebody has to actually violate the NAP in order for aggression to be justified against them in turn.
Yeah,
For
that's
sure.
our belief as libertarians, is that, you are justified in using force, violence, only when you are you or your family, your property are being aggressed against. Why? Because we're human beings. We respect one another, and whether we agree or not, they are fellow human beings, and they deserve the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And to be able to do that, to have that mindset, to be able to coldly execute another person, okay? You have a sickness that you need to be removed from society. You need to, because that's not acceptable.
Yeah, but those who do think it is acceptable or who want it to be more acceptable do come up with noble sounding
Yeah,
rationales.
but it
You know,
doesn't
Right.
they,
matter.
they
These
will say things.
ideas will spread and they'll ultimately cause cultural shifts that lead to people like me or people who I care about being oppressed. Like, it is an easy trap to fall into once you've decided that, yeah, ideas themselves are dangerous because they lead to attitudes that can lead to a dangerous place.
And
There
there are
is some
people
truth
who
to it.
take
Yeah, culture
actions.
does matter. When you normalize
Yeah,
certain ideas, you do make it easier for certain acts to be committed down the line.
right.
So they're not completely wrong, and that's what's dangerous about this. Because then it
There's
becomes a
another
matter of, yeah, who can seize power and protect themselves.
Well,
This
there's
is why
another
you
point to be made here,
Always.
though, which is that some people can give orders without doing the violence themselves, or they can do something sort of like giving orders. They can express strongly worded opinions, and then someone else acting on those opinions, can commit the act of violence, right? So think about when we had the episode on the insurance company CEO who was murdered. That was a tough conversation, because
I,
there's a legitimate argument to be made, that someone in that sort of position is harming people and
well,
is
that those were
benefiting.
a matter of contractual violations. People paid for a service, and then this person was using the fact that they had the power of the state on their side to get out of having to actually fulfill
Is it
their contractual
okay to
violations. We can
kill
link that
someone, though?
episode. We can link that episode in the description later on if people want to go back and watch that one
What I'm
without
asking is,
having
at
to.
what point is use of force okay? Does the burglar have to be, in your house announcing they're going to murder your child? Or is it enough that they're standing outside your window with a crowbar? Or what if they're the mob boss downtown who, through three different layers of cutout, suggests that there's a particular job that ought to be done at your house?
That's an individual decision. And that has to be, because only an individual can decide what is justified violence. Now, the rest of society can decide you are incorrect, okay? But every person makes that decision in the moment. They have to, because no one else can make it for you.
I disagree with you. I think that people working together, taking self-defense classes and deciding together as individuals in a community, they can come to shared definitions, so that way
But again, that still comes
that your
down to the
community
individual
has your
making the
back.
choice.
I agree with you that much, but what I want to clarify here for listeners who may not know in depth our philosophy, we're not saying that you should defend yourself as best you think you can and then hope that society will forgive you after the fact. That's not
No,
freedom.
no, no,
That's not
no.
liberty. You should believe that self-defense is protected by your community, or at the very least, you should live in a community where self-defense and defense of property and rights is a value that everybody shares.
And you should also believe that the minimum amount of violence is what should be applied. If it needs to be applied at all, it needs to be the absolute minimum to prevent the other violence from happening. Is that to stop someone who's attacking you? Okay, again, why, you know, maximum violence is only used in the most desperate of situations, and usually it's because it's gone so wrong at that point that you have no other options.
Well, we started this conversation talking about when it's okay for the federal government to step in. And I think I'm going to do my best in a minute to try and wrap this up. But does anybody have any closing thoughts before I make my effort?
I would say that it's the same for the individual and for the government. If you are protecting life, liberty, and property, you can at least express a justification. If you are not, or if you are intending to go in and do other things that are not in that bound, then that's not acceptable, not for an individual and not for a government.
Right.
You have
So
to
the
be held to the
government,
same standards.
the government shouldn't have additional rights that the individual would not have. If I am not free to go and demand a cut of my neighbor's income, the state should not be able to do that either. If I'm not able to say, hey, I need workers for my factory and I don't have enough people signing up, you are obligated at gunpoint to go and help me. If I can't do that, the state shouldn't be able to come to my door and say, hey, we need people to fight in this war that we decided to get ourselves into. You are obligated to join just because you live here. Exactly. Like, they would need to be held to the same standards as everyone else.
Karyn, come on, jump in here. I know you want to say something.
I think that there needs to be a very acute and well-defined riot, almost war type situation before the federal government should ever deploy into a state without the governor's request. And at that point, I think that the governor should be looking at some kind of a charge themselves. It would have to be that extreme for me to be okay with it. And even then, it would be like, get in there, clean up that situation, and get out. They should never just be deployed willy-nilly because crime rates aren't fantastic. I could never support it.
That would be an interesting, why not? If the governor's not doing their job, at the very least, it's incompetence. At the most, it's malfeasance or deliberate action. So
would it be the federal government, though, that could remove the governor for cause? And can you imagine the chaos?
That's a great point.
The problem is, how do you adjudicate that? Honestly, I don't know. I don't know.
Either.
Well, I'm going to do my best to try and wrap things up. You've given me a lot to think about, and I hope our audience found this, similarly thought-provoking. But
hopefully they'll have some good ideas they can leave in the comments.
oh, I'd love to see what people come up with. And I'm sure there's a few things that we could have explored more, but here we are. It's at the end of another episode of the Liberty Test. And I think the key takeaway is that we didn't just examine federal deployments of the National Guard. We examined what I would think is a crisis of faith in government. And it's playing out across the whole nation. And also, of course, in our own neighborhoods here in New York. But what you guys made clear is that it's not just Charlotte as its own event, or Chicago, or Utah Valley University. It's happening everywhere, every small community, my little town, the nearest city, the whole state of New York. So when gangs of masked thieves can walk into Macy's at the local mall and walk out with stolen merchandise with impunity, when peaceful suburban communities see smash and grab robberies at parks that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago, but also when people are murdered by known dangerous schizophrenics or assassinated by, I assume, a politically motivated killer, we're witnessing government failure at every level. And when you think that the founders gave us a system where every level of government, down to the individual citizen, has not just the right, but I would argue the duty to protect life and property, even if, they don't exercise that duty themselves, they defer it to somebody else. But what happens to that system when multiple levels of government abandon that duty? Right? So like New York State has effectively decriminalized theft through bail reform and other, reforms that put repeat offenders back on the street, sometimes within hours. And then you've got local prosecutors who refuse to prosecute, the so-called minor crimes, the petty crimes that Bob was talking about, even when they're organized retail thefts that destroy livelihoods and raise the price of everything for everybody. And then, of course, when citizens try and defend themselves, they're the ones who face prosecution while the criminals walk free. So then, meanwhile, the federal government answers this by deploying troops and three-letter agencies. And I'll admit, sometimes it's to genuinely help. Sometimes it's political theater, I think. And perhaps it's the first step in a power grab. But regardless, federal deployments like these diminish local autonomy, especially when they last. And when they get normalized, it ultimately sets back the cause of liberty, even as millions perceive Trump as the only one addressing a real crisis in public safety. So even if his National Guard deployments are constitutionally questionable, when the system breaks down this completely, people will support almost anything that promises order, even if it threatens the very freedoms the system was supposed to protect. So this is where principled federalism becomes a life or death question. The founders didn't design federalism as a one-way street, but as a multi-directional check. Every level of government, down to the citizen, has authority to act when others fail to protect rights. At least that's my interpretation based on what we talked about tonight. So when New York refuses to let local communities defend themselves, it forces families and individuals to choose between obeying the law and staying safe. When prosecutors won't prosecute, they force communities to seek other solutions. And when Washington steps in with force from above, it tempts citizens to trade liberty for the illusion of security. So ultimately, when any level of government abandons its duty to protect life, liberty, and property, it loses its moral authority to demand obedience. I'll say that again, because all three matter: life, liberty, and property. That's why principled federalism matters. Government claims a monopoly on force, but in return, it pledges to protect us. When it fails, it forfeits its legitimacy. That's why Trump's Guard deployments and federal interventions resonate. In cases like the murder of Irina Zarutska, where a violent repeat offender slipped through the local cracks, federal prosecution may actually pass our liberty test because it pursues justice when state and local governments will not. But when those same powers are stretched for political theater or to impose order from the top down, they fail the test. And that brings us back to the real crisis. This isn't just about federal overreach or local neglect. It's about the collapse of trust in the entire system. From Washington to Albany, government must be reminded that its only legitimate purpose is protecting individual rights. So what do we do as citizens? We take responsibility. That means demanding prosecutors and local leaders do their jobs. Show up at board meetings, speak up at town councils, and hold officials accountable. But more than that, be personally accountable. Get trained. Take a self-defense class. Buy a firearm and learn to use it responsibly, or at least practice situational awareness. Know who's sitting behind you on the train, for example. You can also connect with your local police. There's a role for government here, and you can talk to them about securing your home and your neighborhood. They are theoretically experts in that. But above all, look out for one another. Support businesses under attack. Support neighbors under threat. And refuse to let politics excuse government failure. Because liberty isn't preserved by watching Washington like it's a spectator sport. Liberty is preserved by citizens who refuse to be passive, who insist on their rights, and who act locally to defend them. That's the real liberty test, and it's a test each of us individually has to pass. So I'll leave the subject there for today, but before we go, there is one more loss we want to honor. This one is personal to New York libertarians, and that is former LPNY chair Jim Rosenbeck. Those of us currently active in the movement, we have big shoes to fill. Jim will be missed. And with that, that was the Liberty Test. I'm Dan Castello. We'll see you next time.
Where will you be? So your mind is free, speech is forbidden, as martyrs for peace from the world will be driven away by the sound of a bellowing thunder and choke on the blood of a dream going under. As arrogant men tear up our Constitution, and from every direction we cry revolution, standing together. love of our country as I